know the history of military conflict in Afghanistan.
Hurry up.
Long years of floundering and ultimate failure. We're not going to repeat that mistake.
2002, Donald Rumsfeld dictates out a memo saying, how are we going to get out of Afghanistan? And he ends it with one word: help! Exclamation point. Completely at odds with what the public had been told.
Privately, people were saying this war was a total disaster.
This is off the record.
But we offered anonymity to people who couldn't speak the truth publicly.
We were never going to succeed.
This isn't going to work.
The White House says we're winning the war, but in these interviews, it's clear we're not winning.
We are winning this war.
What bull?
Officials were under pressure to report only good news.
This goal is achievable.
But people knew the war could not be won.
Every measurable activity is failing.
We're spending $300 million a day for 20 years.
25% is being stolen, and it's ending up in the hands of the insurgents. Corruption, bribery, stealing. And the embassy said, oh, don't go down that road. Don't go down that road? How about fixing the problem?
There was this exaggeration after exaggeration of what we accomplished, and it went all the way up to the president.
We have liberated village after village.
We broke the Taliban's momentum.
We are winning
Responsibly, deliberately, and safely.
They're lying to you.
They didn't care about what the reality of this war was. They cared about whether or not their narrative was going to be upset by somebody speaking to the press.
Sometimes the truth is so precious it must be accompanied by a bodyguard of lies. I don't want to be quoted on this.
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Tuesday, September 23rd, 2025. I'm especially thrilled to have Matt Ho back on the show. Matt, it's always a pleasure. What we just saw was the 2-minute trailer to your new movie, A Body of Lies, about which we will speak in a few minutes. But welcome back to the show. You look great. And we'll talk to you about that fascinating, captivating film that you're involved with soon. But before we get to it, and before we get to the futility of war, particularly the futility of the war in Afghanistan, your thoughts on the now near universal recognition of a Palestinian state. Is this substantive or just performative?
I like, Judge, first of all, it's great to be back with you. It's good to see you. I've been listening to you these last 6 months, all my colleagues as well. I think Al Jazeera put it the best in a bit of a deadpan, dry, dark humor sort of way with their headline, 108 years after the Balfour Declaration, Britain recognizes Palestine. You know, almost like an onion type of satirical headline there. I think that's the reality of this. For me, I know others feel it has some weight, some merit, and I'm sure it does. It is a slap in the face to the Israelis, but it is ultimately, to me, performative. In many ways, it plays into what the Israelis and many Americans and some Europeans want. They want Fortress Israel. They want us versus them. The idea of the world ganging up on Israel, the world recognizing the enemy of the Israeli people, the Palestinians, as a state, well, that fits into their cosmic or universal or biblical understanding of the world in which they live, as well as their obligations and their responsibilities. So if anything, one concrete thing that may come out of this is the annexation of the West Bank, or Judah and Samaria, as the United States government in Israel calls it. And so, you have that type of aspect where is this going to play into the hands of those who just want to further escalate the situation, as well as view the idea of a fortress Israel, Israel against the world, of course, with the United States backing it, as what is necessary in order to keep a pace or to keep constant with the way the world order is supposed to be based upon biblical history, right? I mean, so for me, that's what I come back to. And of course, the reality is it doesn't do anything for the dozens of Palestinians murdered today by Israel, the dozens that were murdered yesterday, et cetera, et cetera. I'm really in a place where I don't think anything will occur with Gaza other than the completion of the Israeli and the American plan for it. And that for those of us who are invested in this, who care about this, we have to start doing something about the West Bank now. It's already a bit too late for that, but because what has happened in Gaza will happen in the West Bank. It won't look exactly as it did in Gaza, but it certainly will be very similar to the genocide we've seen in the last couple of years in Gaza.
Does the Netanyahu regime follow any moral standards or any acceptable body of international law?
No, I certainly no body of international law, and their moral standards are their own. Again, in line with their biblical understanding of who they are, of the world, of history, the cosmic or universal ecology in which they exist. So morality-wise, for them, it makes perfect sense. This is a supremacist, religious-esque political agenda, Zionism. This is the violence or action aspect of apartheid that we're seeing carried out here. This is ethnic cleansing, all based upon racial and religious superiority. So within that, there is a set of morality, a set of codes that enforces the foundation that these people believe in, why what they're doing is right and just and ultimately ordained by God. So to them, yes, there is a morality, but for those of us who are witnessing this, there is nothing moral about what's happening, even if you can't understand why they're pursuing it.
Well, there's really no Palestine left to save, is there?
I fear, Judge, that's the case with Gaza, that we are going to be for the next couple of years witnessing the continual degradation of the people of Palestine in Gaza, that we'll be talking about this next September after. The whole plan is, as we've seen it laid out, they're very clear. They're overt about this. They're not hiding anything. Push the Palestinians into concentration camps, into these tight little places. Amawasi on the coast there, which many people are probably familiar with because that's supposedly the safe zone, even though Israel bombs it every day. But there are 1 million people in Al-Maswi. To understand how big Al-Maswi is, it's for those of you who've been to Washington, D.C., it's roughly, I believe, 9 kilometers square. So 3 kilometers by 3 kilometers, or what's that, 1.7, 1.8 miles by 1.8 miles, something like that, right? 9 kilometers square. That is the same space as from the Capitol through the Lincoln Memorial and tuck in the White House grounds. You've got 1 million people living in tents, getting bombed every day on the coast with no water and no food. And that's where Israel wants them all to go to. And so that's the plan. We see the plan. And eventually, maybe it's so bad that these people make a break through Egypt, or maybe something happens and Jordan lets them in, or maybe these ships show up and take them all to Madagascar, to Ecuador, or someplace like that. That's the plan. That's the hope that underlines this plan, this American-Israeli plan for Gaza, that will be carried out. And if it just 5 years from now, they're still bombing people every day in these concentration camps in Israel, well, so be it. That's we didn't fulfill it the way we exactly wanted to, but it's good enough. We've gotten most of Gaza, and we've made the Gaza problem, the Gaza nuisance, into, yeah, it's a drag, but it's something that we can manage. And of course, for the Israelis, this includes Lebanon, includes Syria, includes Iran. Their chief goal, their main objective has always been the West Bank. And so we see as Israel pushes into Lebanon, they want to create a safe zone. They're going to destroy villages in Lebanon, do that. They've taken control over the southern third of Syria. Well, of course, issues with what we've seen happen with Iran. All that is what would be called a shaping operation to get things in place, to get things in order, so that when they begin the annexation of the West Bank, those problems or those potential problems that could emanate from those places are no longer there. And of course, the West Bank, again, has always been their chief principal objective. And so I think we've already seen the annexation begin. When I was there a year ago, you could see that the annexation was beginning. But I think in the next few years, what they will do is begin that annexation in the West Bank in fervor. You'll see essentially Gaza-like operations in the rural parts, the destruction of the villages, the genocide, the cleansing of the people. They've already put forward plans that say roughly only 5 Palestinian cities will exist. And those cities will just basically become besieged, and they'll be left to die on the vine. And the door will be open to go into Jordan. And again, the hope will be that these people take that exit. And I believe that will be the plan that the Israelis and the Americans will carry out for the West Bank. And so we will see this. We will have plenty to talk about, Judge, for years to come, unless something changes. And God help me, I don't know what that is, though.
Why did we fight the war in Afghanistan?
Oh, gosh, Judge, that's a long and complicated question. I mean, there are so many reasons for that war. The way I like to describe it is, say there's a family that has a favorite restaurant, and the father likes to go there because he likes the steaks. The mom likes the fish. The son, the waitresses are good looking, so the son likes to go there. There are so many compelling reasons, none of them good reasons, but compelling reasons for the war in Afghanistan to continue it, particularly in the months following 9/11. Following 9/11, of course, the political realities for the George W. Bush administration. He had to take some type of military action. Now, Al-Qaeda at that point, according to the FBI, was between 200 and 400 people worldwide. So does anyone think the invasion of a country that's been at war at that point in 2001, they've been at war for 25 years, essentially, it would be a good idea to jump into the middle of a civil war? But that's what we chose to do because that's what seemed to be the best thing politically for the Americans. And then once that began, whether it was the neoconservatives, people like Zalmay Khalilzad, right, Paul Wolfowitz, others who dominated the George W. Bush foreign policy apparatus, their chance to see their theories tested out for real. Because remember, this is following the end of the Cold War, and this is following the publication, Judge, of 2 really important books in the 90s, Sam Huntington's Clash of Civilizations and Francis Fukuyama's The End of History, which weren't books that predicted what Washington would think. It was telling us what Washington was thinking. The people in Washington, D.C. saw that they have won the Cold War, saw that our system was victorious, saw that we now have primacy and we could do whatever we want, not just address threats, but we could make history. And so Afghanistan for the neoconservatives became a test bed to prove that. And then, of course, there's all the other more mundane but equally sickening and important reasons, such as the amount of money made off of the Afghan war. Like in the clip you hear me say there, we spent $300 million a day for 20 years on the Afghan war. A lot of people got very, very wealthy. So that inertia, right? And then it became an issue as well for the U.S. military. We had lost the war in Iraq. So what does Barack Obama do? He escalates the war in Afghanistan. This gives the U.S. military a chance to get a win because nobody's going to give the U.S. military credit for Iraq, right? That was Secretary of Defense Bob Gates. That was his, as far as I understand, his primary reason for backing the surge in Afghanistan was to give the United States military a chance to make up for Iraq. Right. I mean, so you had all these different reasons that were percolating through Washington, D.C. that made it a good idea to go in, a good idea to stay, a good idea to escalate. And then, of course, why we never got out was because President Obama simply didn't want to take the political risk of pulling troops out of a Muslim nation when there could be a Muslim guy who detonates a car bomb in Times Square. So we're stay there the entire time out of domestic political concerns And that's how it becomes America's longest war, ends up costing over $2 trillion directly. $3.5 trillion when you count the long-term costs of the war, whether it be continuing to pay for the debt we inherited from that war or paying for healthcare for guys like me. It's gonna be $3.5 trillion for that war. 2,500 American soldiers were killed. At least 2,000 American contractors were killed. The tens of thousands who were wounded. And of course, I haven't mentioned the horror that has befallen the Afghan people. What they went through those 20 years, and the fact that they're now saddled again with the Taliban. The reasons were all selfish. They were all greedy. They were all vainglorious, and they were multiple. And they all converged on a point that this makes sense for us to stay, even though we're losing, even though there's no chance for us to win, even though this hurts us in a myriad of ways. We're bankrupting ourselves. We're hurting our own people. We're still waiting for the blowback that should come from that war.
Right.
I'm
going to play another clip, this one featuring you, but this movie is called The Body of Lies. It premieres today, September 23rd on Paramount Plus. It's Matt and his colleagues investigating America's 20-year war in Afghanistan and how the public was materially and substantially lied to by the government. Chris.
Coming up! Come on! Right there! Go! Come on!
Officials were under pressure to report only good news. So you look on the latest assessment report, and you see, well, that district, it's colored that we control it. But you go out to these small little outposts, and there'd be a lieutenant, so a kid who's 23, 24, 25 years old, he'd have 30 or 40 American troops, maybe about the same number of Afghan troops, maybe less. And you'd ask them, what part of this district do you control? And they'd say, I can control what's in the line of sight of my machine guns. That'd be it. And you'd hear that over and over and over again. And you saw the impossibility of the tasks put to the U.S. and NATO troops.
Sometimes the truth is so precious it must be accompanied by a bodyguard of lies.
I don't want to be quoted on this.
Did George W. Bush and Barack Obama and Donald Trump know the truth, or was it kept from them?
That's a really good question, Judge. I don't know about Bush. I believe Obama understood it generally. If you go and you look at what Bob Woodward reported about the decision making in Barack Obama's first year in office when the U.S. escalates the war, we can't forget how big of an escalation that was. We went from having about 30,000 American troops, about 15 or 20,000 NATO troops, and roughly about 40,000 contractors in Afghanistan in January of 2009 when Barack Obama comes into office. A year and a half, there's 100,000 American troops, 40 or 45,000 NATO troops, and 100,000 contractors, many of them American, all working for the U.S. We're spending $120 billion a year on the war at that point. So Barack Obama put a 250,000 man army into Afghanistan and lost. Now, in Woodward's reporting, he pushes back on that plan very much. And seems as if he's boxed in, that he has no support. And I know this. I know when I resigned, so people who are unfamiliar with me, I was in Afghanistan in 2009 during that escalation of the war. I left. I resigned in protest over the escalation. I got to know a lot of people who were also against it, which was pretty much everyone besides top senior leadership who all had their own reasons for wanting to see the war escalated, right? Hillary Clinton wanted to see it escalated because it was good politically. Right, showed that when she went in 2016, she was the Secretary of State that oversaw the United States win in Afghanistan. Right, also why she's such a cheerleader for Libya and then for Syria. I explained about Bob Gates before earlier. Of course, generals like David Petraeus and Stan McChrystal, their vainglory, as we know of them, speaks entirely for why they want to see a war like that escalated. And so I'd hear from the ambassador to Afghanistan, special representative to Afghanistan, Pakistan, so the president's civilian advisor on this. At that time, it was Richard Holbrooke. The American ambassador was Carl Eichenberry, a former 3-star American general who had commanded in Afghanistan. And they would say to me stuff like, look, Matt, we go in there and we're not allowed to talk. It's just a cheerleading squad for the escalation. They're all so imbued with this idea of counterinsurgency and how we learned the lessons of Iraq, and that this time we're going to get it right. And so in Woodward's reporting, he reports how Obama pushes back. He says, you talk about this Obama paraphrase him. You talk about this counterinsurgency and you say it's worked, but you can't show me anywhere it has worked. And so Obama essentially gets boxed in. And what's left out of Woodward's reporting, which is really important, I think that what the absence is critical, is any political conversations about the war. So Woodward is reporting stuff that's classified in that book. He's in the secure, the tanks, as they were called, the secure conference rooms, right? While these discussions are being had. But where's the conversations between Obama and his chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, or his senior political advisor, David Axelrod? And we know, though, through other reporting, as well as this is why Obama leans so heavily into the drone strikes, that again, as I said before, right? If Mr. President, if you pull troops out of Afghanistan and a bomb goes off in LA, they're going to blame you for it, and you're not going to win in 2012, right? And so that's what occurs, I think, to push the president at that time to make a decision he may not have wanted to make. Now, I also know that the information that he was receiving was nothing like what I was saying, what others like me were saying, what anyone you talk to who've been over there was saying. And I know this because Chuck Hagel, who became the Secretary of Defense, former senator, former chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, I had to go in to the President's Intelligence Advisory Board, which Hagel, along with former Senator Dave Boren, chaired. And the President's Intelligence Advisory Board does exactly that. It's supposed to look at the information that the president's receiving, and is this honest, real information that he's getting, or is it biased? Is it political? And that's what Hagel and Boren wanted to know. They had me in there. I had to testify to them. Why is the president getting stuff that is 180 degrees different than what you're saying and what we're hearing at that time? Both Hagel and Boren were at universities. What we're hearing from all these captains and majors and lieutenant colonels from the Army and the Marine Corps and the Air Force who are coming through our schools and telling us what's really going on in Afghanistan. How come what the president is getting on his desk doesn't resemble at all what you are saying? And so I think those two things, the political as well as the deep state, if you want to call it that, the institutional aspects of this. These are these people who are running these institutions, and then many of them who populate them, the career people in these national security institutions. Well, look, I'll just put it this way, Judge. You'll be. I don't know if you saw this or not, but Dave Petraeus interviewed Ahmed al-Sharar, the Al-Qaeda boss in charge of Syria now. He interviewed him yesterday in New York at some conference, and among other things, General Petraeus said to Sharar, who used to be known as Al-Jilani when he ran the Al-Qaeda band in Syria, "I'm a big fan of yours." So that gives you an idea of the type of people we're talking about here, who are.
Wait a minute. Who said to whom? Petraeus said it to.
Petraeus said to Sharar, "I am a big fan of yours."
This is a murderous thug who killed Americans who Petraeus fought against.
Right. This is an Al-Qaeda leader who was in U.S. prisons in Iraq for 5 years for trying to kill American forces who, so this is a type of people we have who are in power, right? And they maintain that privilege. They maintain that access. I'm sure David Petraeus is on CNN or MSNBC multiple times again this week, right? Wow. So it goes beyond just the momentary aspects. And that's why I think this film, Bodyguard of Lies, and that expression comes from Winston Churchill. He says, as they quote Rumsfeld there, saying, in wartime, truth is so precious, it must be defended by a bodyguard of lies. Churchill was talking about, so don't say when the D-Day landing is going to be, don't say where the day, right? Like that's the idea, not what these people came to believe, that what they were doing was so precious, was so right, was so justifiable, that the ends justify the means.
So very similar. We were talking before about the morality of the Israelis. The Americans have that same type of morality. And it's often a very selfish, self-righteous, vainglorious type of morality, but it's one that they guide themselves on and upon which they have these supposed principles and values. I heard you talking to Ray McGovern yesterday, and you asked Ray about the rules-based order. And Ray answered that very well. That was a way, particularly for the Biden administration, to justify what they were doing, to give themselves some type of righteousness, to give themselves some type of intellectual and moral credence as to their actions, when in fact they were completely contradictory to any type of intellectual or moral integrity.
Right, right. Matt, we have to go, but we'll pick up this conversation when it's convenient for you, hopefully next week. Where can people see Bodyguard of Lies?
Judge, it's on Paramount Plus, started streaming today. So very easy. You can, if folks who don't have Paramount Plus, you can do a free trial for a week. I don't work for Paramount, so feel free to watch it and then get rid of your free trial as far as I'm concerned. But I also want to give I do want to mention the filmmakers involved: Alex Gibney, the producer, Dan Krause, the director. Jigsaw Productions is their studio, their production firm. These are men and women who've been working on this film for more than 5 years, and they put their heart and soul into it. And the movie, for a lot of us who are nerds about this, you'll learn things, but you won't be surprised. But what I'm saying to people is get people who don't know a lot about that war to watch this, because it's an excellent, excellent entry into that war. But then overall, why we talk about these things, why, Judge, you and I and all our colleagues and most of the good folks who are watching this share the same principles, that war is a terrible, terrible decision.
Thank you, Matt. God bless you. You look great. We look forward to seeing you again soon. All the best.
Thanks, Judge.
And coming up later today on all of this, the futility of war, the slaughter of innocents in Gaza, and the naivete of the Americans in Ukraine. At 3 o'clock, Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski. At 4 o'clock, Scott Ritter. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.